We came a long way with the show, haven't we? I used to absolutely love this show. I remember back in high school watching season 1 of the show and absolutely loving it. It felt fresh. We didn't really get like obsessed, delusional murder stalker story from the perspective of the delusional murderer stalker individual. On this scale, mostly it felt like it's just serial killers and stuff like that. It showed in an interesting way how those type of people operate, how their brain works a little bit, through the lens that was not only very serious in a lot of aspects, but it also kept the aspect of just being a fun and entertaining show on a very high level, with great balancing between the serious aspect of the story with more entertainment focused moments and bits. Penn Badgley was doing an exceptional work as Joe Goldberg, playing the character that was always very repulsive and scary, but also with so much charisma and wit that you just couldn't stop watching the show. With all of the excellently written and performed monologues and narrations, small character bits, in the way he acted and talked. Season 2 was basically a retelling of the exact same story of Season 1, with a different, I would say, a lot better ending. The idea and the story didn't feel so fresh, but both the story and the idea for the show were so good from the beginning that it didn't hurt that season that much. It was still excellent. Season 3 was where they started to change up the formula, and in time's perspective, Season 3 was okay, I guess. It definitely wasn't as good as the previous two. It had quite a few major problems, but it had some interesting ideas, and Love was such a good character, and her chemistry with Joe was so good that her and Joe were at least able to carry that season to being pretty watchable. Season 4 was a complete and utter crapshoot, but I would say it was so bad, it was kinda good. Most of the ideas for the season were so bad. Most of the new characters were completely unwatchable. The idea for the main storyline was so completely rancid, but I had fun. Not the good type of fun they wanted me to have, like in seasons 1 and 2, or in some moments in season 3, but in a this show is so bad, I can't stop laughing type of way. And you know what? I kinda wished we at least stayed in a so bad it's good territory, because what we got in season 5 is simply completely unacceptable, especially for the final season of the show. Let me explain. Let's start from Joe, because even if this season was bad on every single level, but Joe was at least as good as he was in previous seasons, I feel like this season would at least be watchable. The problem is, Joe lost basically all of his aura and everything that made him entertaining in the first place. Like, everything that made him such an interesting character to watch seems to be gone in season 5. And I don't think Penn Badgley is at fault, to be completely honest, because in the very few, very scarce moments where he has material to shine, he still shines. The biggest problem with Joe with season 5, and with season 5 in general, is the writing. His narration feels mandatory now. Like, the writers didn't really have any idea for it, but it had to be in the show because, well, it's you. It has to have the Joe narration. It's like the spine of the show. His monologues feel forced. The one-liners are not existent. Almost the entire charisma of Joe Goldberg is no longer here. That also isn't helped by the fact that he doesn't feel like a real threat anymore. Sure, he still kills quite a few people in this season, but he doesn't feel actually dangerous. He fucks up basically everything he does. Every single plan of his goes to shit, and he is tactically outmaneuvered by every single person in this show, even by the people who have no idea he's on their ass. I know he never was the greatest at what he does. That's what made him such an interesting character. He was always at least kinda incompetent, but he succeeded a lot during the previous seasons, especially in seasons 1 and 2. And because he was successful in a lot of his plans and ideas before, it made the moments of failure have so much more tension and excitement because it felt like the entire ruse could basically fall apart at any moment. That was also added to how dangerous Joe felt at the beginning, because with a pretty basic skill level and pretty basic mistakes that he made, and that every time at the end of the day he always was able to fix it and then learn from those mistakes so he wouldn't make him again, made him feel even more dangerous, like he's learning, he's becoming better at this. In this season he simply fails too much, and he gets away with it by doing basically nothing. He doesn't have to fix basically anything. That not only makes any tension that would there ever existed gone, but he feels like he can no longer do anything to anybody, to be honest. And I would probably have no problem with that if it was actually made into a part of his character in season 5. Like, if you think about it, in season 4, he won everything. He got Kate, he was able to slip away from everything with no problem, he got his life back, now he has his son back, and thanks to marrying Kate, he's not only now rich, he has the best resources in the world to keep every single body in the closet. That idea would be very interesting. It would be an interesting addition that could potentially lead to his downfall, because it's the final season, he has to follow, right? It could be something. The problem is, it never really became part of his character. They very much try to enforce the idea that it's still the same Joe, but now rich and famous. Without that character development, that at least could have been interesting if done well, we got left with a character that feels dumber, more incompetent, and less charismatic than ever. He's no longer the character that keeps you away from turning off the show. He's just there. He's the main character, but he no longer feels like a must-watch character. Another major problem with this season is the script now seems to not only have ADHD, but also a strong case of memory loss, because I swear to God, not a single plotline that isn't super major stuff survives a single episode and not get completely forgotten in the next 2 episodes. Like seriously, I don't think anything that wasn't super important part of the entire story went past the episode that it was introduced in. It feels like the creators had a lot of ideas before this season, like the information about the cancellation of the show caught them by surprise, like they had plans for at least another season, and instead of deciding to focus on the best ideas, develop them, and focus the entire story around them, they put everything in this season with no idea how to insert it into the story, with zero hope that those ideas will develop into anything, because they immediately had to get to the next thing. Like, this is the best example I can give of this. Minor spoilers, everyone, but this part of the story is kind of obvious. There is a storyline where Joe has an affair with Bronte, aka the new you, who I will get to later, and Kate doesn't know about it. So instead of giving us a storyline where Joe tries to hide the affair, which could have at least been something, that could have given us some intrigue and tension, Kate learns about the affair, I swear to God, in 7 minutes of runtime. No, I'm not joking. 7 minutes. The affair basically starts with a sex scene at the end of an episode, and at minute 7 of the next episode, Kate already knows. Or, you know what? I just realized that it was probably even less, because the previously on section added to the runtime, so it was probably like 5 to 6 minutes, actually. And that basically paints you a picture of how this show is written story-wise. Nothing is given proper runtime, nothing is given enough care, it's just stuff happening for a quick second, and then we leave for the next thing almost immediately. It also doesn't help that for every good idea they had, there was also like 5 terrible ones to follow, which could also be a good segue to another thing I wanted to talk about, which is how dumbed down and sloppy the commentary in this show got. This show was never shy to talk about various issues and topics that plague people in today's society. Obviously, everything surrounding Joe, how those type of people operate and how they get into people's lives, but also domestic abuse, bystander effect, how different types of bad parents can have long-lasting effects on the kids when they become adults, just to name a few. And at least from what I remember, it was a long time ago, so I may have some rose-tinted glasses on, but from what I remember, there were always shown with at least a lot of care. The commentary wasn't always perfect, but it felt like the creators cared about the topics they wanted to talk about, with at least a goal of not causing any more problems, and put at least some of the spotlight on those problems. And they made a similar attempt in season 5, focusing mainly on 3 things. Of course, Joe manipulation tactics, which I will get to in more detail in the Bronte section. The second, how the rich and famous people manipulate the court of public opinion when they do some really shitty stuff. And I guess this was supposed to be like conspiracy theory, weird rabbit hole people, investigators on the internet stuff. It was so horribly shown that it's hard to even explain, but we will get to that. And the way the show, the last 2 I mentioned, is what I want to focus on, because they are both done very poorly, but in completely different ways. Let's start from the manipulating public perception, because that feels like they wanted to show and tell as little as possible. I mean, they showed some tidbits, like for example, they showed that there are even exact bullet points that PR people have to make the best apologies for the famous people to the public, but they never even tried to mention or explain why those bullet points exist, why do they work, how they manipulate the public into either forgiveness or levels of outrage that make you even more engaged. I feel like a lot of people, especially young people who grew up in the internet era, know that those types of things exist. We've been through quite few many YouTuber apology videos to know that they are all exactly the same and they all say exactly the same. There is a reason why PR teams and crisis management teams exist, but I feel like a lot of people just don't notice how their perception is being swayed by them. It feels like they intentionally did not want to dabble into why certain things work when a famous people tries to get forgiveness or at least their career back on track. Because let's be honest here, they work for Netflix, a platform that paid and still pays a large amounts of money to people who actively use those tactics frequently. And they do it a lot more compared to, maybe not Disney, but compared to most media conglomerates, which is crazy because those are media conglomerates. They don't give a fuck until it stops producing money. They would be sabotaging their own employer. The problem is, if you don't want to talk about it in a way that has some value, why even dabble? Why even waste our time? Because the way they showed all of that in this show wasn't entertaining, it wasn't meaningful, it didn't actually say anything, so it was not only a waste of time, but also a pretty unentertaining waste of time. The other topic of weird internet rabbit holes and people in those rabbit holes has a different problem. The creators clearly have no fucking idea about the topic, and the way they try to tackle it makes it seem like pure nonsense, mostly because it's another storyline that got very little screen time compared to what it probably needed. It all feels random, chaotic, like it makes no sense. And honestly, in this case, I don't want to complain that much, because with what they actually showed, it was completely unwatchable and ridiculous. I don't know, it just felt like they didn't want to actually say anything this season, but at least pretend like they are saying something, because they always at least tried. Now let's get to the next topic I wanted to tackle, which is our new victim slash love interest, depending how you look at it. A character that introduces herself to us as Bronte. While watching this season, I had a sudden realization how throughout every single season of this show, every quote-unquote you was a fantastic character that held the show together in a lot of ways. In Ty's perspective, Beck was fantastic, being probably the most established and developed character in the show outside of Joe's existence. Love was excellent as someone who, in a lot of ways, was a reflection of Joe, and how Joe slowly realized that he hates that reflection, without realizing that a lot of the things he saw in Love, he probably saw in the mirror too, or at least he ignored every time he looked in the mirror. Marianne as a showing of a strong, independent single mother with her own demons, who got her life almost completely ruined because of this one crazy bastard, was absolutely amazing. And Kate as the only person who would play with none of Joe's games and tricks. She didn't give a fuck. He had to fucking work. All of them excellent characters, individually and in contrast with Joe. And every single one of them completely different. And in this pantheon of great characters, Bronte unfortunately sticks out as the least interesting one, and that's by a pretty large margin. My two main problems with this character is a lot of the things surrounding her getting enamored with Joe are unwatchable and annoying, and more importantly B, this character doesn't feel like a full character. It feels at the same time like a combination of two characters with two completely different storylines, and more like not a character, but creators' regret that they left no potential way to bring Beck back for the final season. Let's start with the second one, because I feel like this is the more important one. Basically, the entire motivation and the way Bronte acts and moves around Joe is because of Beck. Once we learn about that fact, it is repeated like a mantra over and over again. That everything is happening because of Bronte's relationship with Beck and how much Beck meant to her. She is basically the sole reason why all of this is happening. At least at the beginning, she wants revenge. Well, obviously not her falling in love with Joe, but everything else. Which is honestly a pretty uninspired idea for a character, and a pretty uninspired idea for this story to end. Especially looking at the fact that we never really saw her in season 1, which makes it also kinda lazy. But that's beside the point. But it also makes it feel a lot more like she's trying to fill a place where Beck was supposed to be than be an actual character a lot of the times. She doesn't feel like the second most important character of this season at no point, not even third behind Kate. She doesn't feel like the most important, or at least the second most important part of this story. More like an ode to the show's distant past. Which, on a side note, the odes to the history of the show, seasons 1 and 2 and stuff like that, are mixed results. Some of them are kinda cute, some of them are why are you even here? We get to see basically her origin story, but except for that, they did basically absolutely nothing to establish her as her own independent character, which maybe could have worked if they acknowledged that as much as Joe started taking over her life and her mind, Beck's death basically did the exact same thing. But they didn't. Even when they tried to add some layers to her, her storylines received basically the same treatment as any other, which is, as I said earlier, done in less than an episode and quickly forgotten, which unfortunately makes her kind of feel like a one-dimensional character who is supposed to just fill space that Beck was supposed to occupy at the end. Which makes it even worse because her placement at the end feels completely undeserved. Out of all of Joe's victims, she never feels like the one who should actually win in the end. For this entire season, I felt like they are doing everything to finish it on Kate actually finishing Joe completely. By the way, the ending of episode 9 and cutting the episode 10 entirely would be such a better ending, but at this point that's bad streaming television shows one-on-one. What could we expect at this point? Like, an idea for a character who falls in love with the entirety of Joel Goldberg, with all the killing, stalking, obsessions, and all that stuff, was a good idea on paper, and they could have done so much more with that if her character was more developed, if there were more layers to her, but it felt like they tried to combine two completely different characters into one. Someone looking for revenge for a person he killed that she cared about, and a person who loses herself because she fell in love with a sick and twisted manipulator and a serial killer, and because they didn't really have the runtime to do both those stories justice, we got left with a character that doesn't feel fully realized, more like a loose collection of ideas. The second, definitely small problem, but it was still very annoying, is that basically everything surrounding her and this relationship is simply horrid television from the entertainment standpoint. Her friends are the worst characters in the show's history, and it's not particularly close. One of them uses the word sus in a serious sentence, not as a joke. And when I heard that, I stopped the show, I stood up, I started walking around my room like I was losing my mind, and had an existential crisis. Basically, every conversation her and Joe have sounds like a bunch of complete gibberish, like they are talking about nothing, and not in a they are lovers, they talk about nothing, but they have so much chemistry you understand type of way. It's just complete nonsense. Also, I don't know why they decided to extend the number of sex scenes in this season. I'm mentioning when I'm talking about Bronte because all of the sex scenes are Joe and Bronte, but they feel more uncomfortable than ever before, especially those ones who try to be, let's just say, spicy in an even worse 50 Shades style. Yes, those types of scenes made my skin crawl, and I wanted to rip both my eyes and ears out just so I don't have to neither see or hear those scenes ever again. But let's finish on a real and actual positive of this season. And it's surprisingly not the fact that it ends, but it's the only character that felt like they have a good consistent story throughout the entire season that beats slowly but surely, which is Kate. Kate realizing more and more how much of a monster Joe actually is and trying to figure out how to stop him in a best way possible and least dangerous way possible that causes the least damage to everyone around her was the only fully watchable part of the season. And not only was it watchable, it was actually pretty fucking great. The progression was well paced, the character development was great, it felt real, it felt important, and it was a fantastic extension of her story from season 4. Kate always was a really good character, but in season 5 she became, honestly, one of the best characters in the history of the show. But, with all that in mind, was this season good? Fuck no! This season was completely and utterly horrible. The absolutely dismal storyline work, horrid storytelling for the most part, terrible characters, worst attempts at saying something meaningful in the show's history. This being, in general, a really bad conclusion to this story, with the addition of a complete character assassination of one of the most engaging characters in the last 10 years of television, make this season an absolute torture. I would give this season a 1, and it's not a 0 only because Kate was so awesome. But was this show as a whole good? Well, that's a very difficult question to answer, honestly. We have 2 excellent seasons, one that for the most part was pretty okay, one so bad it's good season, and one completely rancid one. Very inconsistent throughout its runtime, but I would still say yes, this show was good. Some of my fondest memories of watching television shows was watching season 1 of this show with my friends, just having an absolute blast. So overall, I have a lot more fond memories of the show than I have bad ones, despite the fact the bad ones are a lot more recent. I would probably recommend this show, at least watch first 2 seasons, maybe season 3 if you can survive it, and season 4 if you like terrible funny television. But hey, what do you think about this season and this show? Was this season as bad as I think? Was it better? Maybe the show was always us, and I was just lied to by my younger self. I don't know. But if you want to discuss the show, I will be more than happy to talk about it in the comments. Hopefully, I will be able to edit this one before Last of Us ends. I don't know how much time do I have. I am probably fucked, but either way, next up, season 2 of The Last of Us.